Did you know that parents rank financial literacy as the #1 most difficult life skill to teach? Meet Greenlight, the debit card and money app for families. With Greenlight, you can send money to kids quickly, set up chores, automate allowance, and keep an eye on your kids' spending with real-time notifications. Kids learn to earn, save, and spend wisely, and parents can rest easy knowing their kids are learning about money with guardrails in place. Try Greenlight risk-free today at greenlight.com/Wondery.
If you're looking to streamline your audio advertising buys and maximize your revenue, look no further than Triton Digital's programmatic audio advertising exchange, A2X. The private exchange consists of only licensed broadcasters and top-tier internet radio publishers, assuring the quality inventory and brand safety you can trust. Visit www.tritondigital.com to learn more.
I'm Alice.
And I'm Brett.
And this is The Prosecutor's Legal Briefs. Welcome back to The Prosecutor's Legal Briefs. I'm your host, Alice, and I'm joined, as always, by my incredibly patient co-host, Brett.
Hi, Alice. I would like to think that I am incredibly patient. Today, we've had a lot of technical issues, but we are fighting through because we want to talk to you guys about the case we love the most. Karen Read, retrial. Number 2, trial 2, weeks 2 and 3. So we'll see what happens.
I mean, it's immense patience to get through this trial yet again. So, dual purpose here.
Exactly. And, you know, it's interesting. A lot of the testimony we're going to talk about today that's happened in the last 2 weeks, it's the same people who testified last trial, but their order is different. The emphasis is different. The people who are not going to testify are sort of looming over this case. So we're not going to talk about the defense as much as we did last trial. I mean, number one, because we're trying to summarize 2 weeks testimony in 1 hour, but also because last trial you had the way the prosecution presented the case, it really set up the defense case. So the cross was just as important as the direct. And you really felt like they were going back and forth. The prosecution would sort of lay out their version, but because of the way they were laying it out, it was sort of opening the door continuously to this conspiracy theory that we're all now very familiar with. And so then the cross-examination would come back and it might be lengthy, but it would also be very focused. And it was focused on sort of establishing this conspiracy. This time around, it feels like the defense cross is much longer, but emptier in a real way because they don't have that sort of coherent message. They're not able to present it in the same way because of the way the prosecution presented the case. And it's been really fascinating to watch. I mean, it just feels like the defense, they're talking, they're asking questions, they're really trying to nail people down on specific turns of phrase and the way they describe things. But the substance of the cross seems much weaker this time than it did the first time around.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I mean, kind of overarching, if you followed it this time, you're not following it this time. I think kind of the broad strokes, especially now that we're 3 weeks, it's hard to believe we're already 3 weeks into the retrial. It feels like the chessboard has been completely reset by the prosecution. I think that is undeniable. We saw that in the opening statements. The way the prosecution was presenting their case was, I think, far better, far more logical, and far more affirmative in telling their story and clear to a jury who should not know much, if anything, about the case. But it seemed like the defense are coming in and playing the exact same moves, regardless of the fact that this is a different chess game. They have their same plays no matter what. Doesn't matter if you move your pawn, I'm going to move my bishop this way. And because of that, and they are the defense, so they are having to present their case second, I think it's coming off very just a whack-a-mole to the jury. It's coming off very confusing because you seem to have had to watch episode 1 or season 1 of Karen Read to understand what's happening in trial 2. But the jury, if they were vetted correctly, do not even know that season 1 happened. And so we are basically, you're seeing it from the jury's perspective, they are dropped into the middle of an ongoing story of, why is Alan Jackson screaming at this witness? She seems really nice. What is happening? Who is reading these text messages? Where did they come from? What's happening? If you are a juror that's actually been vetted correctly and didn't lie, and you don't know anything about this case, I can imagine the defense's strategy being very confusing and their message not coming across, because they're playing the same game, different chessboard.
And of course, the prosecution has the advantage of some of Karen Read's own statements, which are constantly undermining the defense's points. So that's a lot of introduction. We'll go ahead and talk about some of these witnesses. And I would advise you, if you're really interested in this case, watch the trial. It's all available online. You can watch it all. Don't get mad at us for not spending an hour talking about 2 days of cross-examination, because we're not going to do that. You can watch it for yourself and sort of draw your own conclusions. But I think that's one thing. If you can do it, if you can think about this trial and sort of attempt to put the first trial and everything you know about the case out of your mind, I know that's impossible. It's one of the reasons we vet jurors the way we do. I think you'll see this trial is just very weird from that perspective. So Ian Whiffen testified again. He is the cell phone expert with a lovely accent and a Cellebrite expert as well. And he looked at Jim McCabe and John's phones. And he has a couple reasons for being there. One is to debunk one of the key parts of the conspiracy theory, this idea that Jen McCabe was searching How Long to Die in the Cold at 2:27 in the morning. Obviously, if she's doing that, then the conspiracy all of a sudden basically is, true to some extent. It's hard to imagine why she would be searching that. That's the kind of coincidence that if you're someone who's looking at this case rationally, for instance, the fact that Karen Read, she just happens to break her tail light that night. She just happens to call Carrie Roberts at 5 o'clock in the morning and say, John is dead. She just happens to be drunk. Like all of the coincidences that make all of us think she probably did it. That would be a huge coincidence if Jim McCabe just happened to search How Long to Die in the Cold the day that one of her friends died on the front lawn. So that's a really important thing. Ian Whiffen debunks this again, and he explains that this search has a 2:27 timestamp, but that's an artifact. It's when the tab was opened. It was opened at the same time that she's doing things like Googling her daughter's basketball schedule, that sort of thing. And that the search was actually made after 6 a.m., which is consistent with what Jim McCabe will testify to, that in fact she made that search because Karen asked her to search that. And you could imagine why you would. It's like everything else. You get sick. What's the first thing you do? You Google it. So even if Karen Read's perfectly innocent, in fact, I don't think this cuts against Karen Read at all. You see someone you love in the snow, they're being taken away to the hospital. What's the first thing you're going to do? You want to know, what are their chances? Are they going to make it? How serious is this? So that search makes perfect sense to me. Also, despite reports by certain disreputable bloggers, Den did not delete the search. And it was explained sort of exactly how this works. And it's so funny to watch people online. There is repeated testimony that you just couldn't delete this. And people be like, well, I can go into my searches and delete it. And that's how we catch you when you commit a crime, because you're not actually deleting anything. Just because you're deleting it from like your Google history, guess what? It's still in your phone. When you look at your phone, you can tell that happened. So this wasn't deleted.
I think that testimony is really powerful because it explains something, again, I think much better than last time, which is to explain something logically and get ahead of the whole 227 timestamp, right? All of us, most of us, I think probably most people on the jury probably have phones, or at least have ever opened an internet browser and done searches and done more than one search on a browser, right? If a browser is open, I'm just going to go and search something new. And I do this repeatedly in tabs. While I don't know anything about phones, having it explained in that way, I think is very helpful. And like you said, this is confusing why the defense harps on this so much, because the fact that the search is done at all is not necessarily indicative of much here. So they're making hay about a lot, which we have seen in all these 3 weeks in cross-examination. Making hay about everything makes the jury confused about what they should actually pay attention to.
So in John's phone, we also look at it, and it tells us a lot of stuff about the case itself. So really, Jen's phone is, we're debunking the conspiracy. Now let's look at the evidence that John died when the prosecution's saying he did. So Wiggins able to use location data accurate to about 5 meters. Shocker. the phone never went in the house when you look at this accurate data. The only time the phone was within the zone of the house was when the cell connection briefly dropped, making the location error broader. This is something the defense attempted to hammer on Cross, and I actually saw people on Twitter say, see, he could have been in the house. And it's like, no, it is true. If you take the least accurate data, he could have been in the house. As it gets more and more accurate, he's not in the house. It's kind of like if you went to the doctor and you take some sort of preliminary test and it says you have some disease, but then they do a more scientifically reliable test and it says you don't, then guess what? You don't have the disease. It's the same thing here. If you're having to rely on the least accurate data possible to even make your conspiracy theory work, then once you have the more accurate data and it says, no, actually, he never went in there, that is what you should rely on. So John might have gone in the house, but his phone never did. And at this point, and even that error, by the way, was only for like a matter of seconds. So he would have had to have sprinted in the house, gotten beaten up, bitten by the dog, thrown out into the cold in like 20 seconds, and done all that, by the way, while his phone is not measuring any movement. So that pretty definitive.
And that's what we say, like, context clues matter, right? So they take like this, if you have a timeline and they have like one slice of it where the cell phone signal drops, you can't just like forget the fact that where the phone was before and after when the information was incredibly accurate. He did not teleport into the house and teleport right back out within those matter of seconds. But it's very easy when you kind of try to excise the part of the data that you want to see without it being in context. This is why there's the rule, and you see this throughout trial as well, where you want the completeness rule, right? You want to see the whole dialogue, not just the quote. This is the same principle with respect to his cell phone data.
And someone in the chat just said it's like the difference between an X-ray and an MRI. And that's absolutely right. That's a great way to think of it. And it's the same basic thing. So they also talk about, you've heard the flight of stairs thing. This has been another thing people have focused on. He went up and down the stairs. How could you do that in a car? Well, in fact, as we said from the last trial, that happened between 12:21 and 12:24 when we know that he was, in fact, in the car. And Ian explained that basically any number of movements can produce that kind of reading on an iPhone. We talked about this. Look, all this stuff is great, the health readers and the step count and all that stuff. It is not 100% accurate, and you can manipulate it, and I see people do it all the time. It's so funny. Alice and I used to work with somebody, love her to death, but she wears one of those like wrist things that counts your steps, and she'll like sit in her chair and move her arm up and down to get the steps, and I'm like,
why?
You realize
you're fooling yourself.
That doesn't do anything. And she's like, oh yeah, but I wasn't wearing it earlier, so I'm catching up. It's like, okay, sure. Anyway, so the phone arrived at 12:24 and 38 seconds. At 12:32 and 16 seconds, it stopped registering activity. That activity resumed at 6:04 in the morning. So essentially, phone doesn't move again after 12:32.
So this is so interesting, right? It's almost impossible for the phone not to move if someone is around it. Yet we have also, with the same cell phone and the same like location data, you have the defense trying to measure these seconds where he must be going into the house and not taking any fact that there's absolutely zero movement, which indicates just one thing: the phone is immobile. It is not moved by anyone, anything, not by wild animals, not by the snow. It is absolutely still. That data, I think, is incredibly powerful and incredibly difficult to overcome, more so than the couple seconds that they, claim he may have been in the house.
And they have this advantage of a new piece of data that they introduced this trial, which is the temperature of the battery. So at the time that the phone stops moving, the battery temperature starts dropping, and it drops from about 88 degrees to around 42 degrees. And that's at about 6:04 when John's body was found. It gets down to 42 degrees. And this is really interesting. It's colder than that outside, but it only gets 42 degrees. But Once they roll John over to start working on him, suddenly the temperature starts dropping again and it approaches freezing. Why is that happening? Because his body was on top of the phone before that, protecting it from the worst of the cold. And so the temperature drop isn't to the ambient temperature of the air. But once the air is on it, it starts to drop again. Then Carrie Roberts, she testified that she picked up the phone. And sure enough, right after this, you see the temperature start rising again when she puts the phone in her pocket. So you have these two different things about the phone that are telling you the same story about when all this is happening.
I think this is so powerful because obviously 88 degrees is close, lower than the typical body temperature of 98.6 degrees, right? Your phone's not going to be exactly, especially if you're outside, you're holding it with a glove, you're not holding it all the time. But what's incredibly important is it never warms up once it stops, which is a very good indicator that John's body, of course, is no longer at alive temperatures of 98.6. That's incredibly damning. This is not something where he's like slowly dying. I think he's probably gone at this point and going along with the temperatures. And I don't live in the Northeast, but the way that I was able to make sense of the whole body protecting the phone is even this Southern girl, when it drops below 32 degrees here, where we live in the South, which is very rare, we wrap our pipes. Our pipes, what we wrap the pipes in, are not alive, right? Like they're not heating pads. It's just a towel. And I've always thought that. I was like, why is the towel that doesn't have heat, it doesn't give off heat in its own nature, help to protect my pipes? Because of this exact reason. It is a buffer from the ambient temperatures outside.
Yeah, it's basically insulation. So insulation works, right? Same type of deal. So the defense does, I think this was Alessi, and I'll just go ahead and tell you. When Alessi starts talking, my brain stops working. So maybe he made some great points that I missed, but I can only listen to him for so long before I just start to lose it. Like I just can't. Jackson is bad for all sorts of reasons and annoying, and he makes you angry, and his voice makes my blood pressure go up, but I can follow him and he keeps me engaged. Alessi, it's just, I don't know what it is, but by the end of it, I'm just like, whatever you say, I don't care anymore. Sure, not guilty, right?
I feel like the judge has the exact same attitude as
she
you.
Does.
The judge is like, counsel, explain to me, and then it's like, never mind. Please stop talking. Just stop talking.
Alessi will be like, Judge, if you would like, I can explain that. She's like, no, I'm good. Don't explain it. You're good. But I think he did the cross-examination here, and because he usually cross-examines the experts. And look, he does the thing that you're going to do if you're a defense attorney. You point out that experts are never able to say, like, for certain, right? I mean, that's not what they do. They give an opinion to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty, X, right? So, the thing about the phone very briefly when the thing drops being over the house, can you say for certain that he was in the house? Well, no, he can't do that. What he can do is give you the best information. We've talked about this before. Everybody, I feel like they listen to this and you see people who are pro Karen Read and they'll say, see, that's reasonable doubt. He can't say for certain. No, that is not how it works. You have to take all the evidence. If the only person we had was Ian Whiffen, then maybe that would be reasonable doubt. Maybe. Right? But he's not. So what you're doing is you're taking the data and the information he is giving you, and you're putting that together with all the other evidence. And when you put it all together, the picture that emerges is that he never went in that house. He died right there where he was found. And later on, presumably, we'll have more evidence. And the reason that happened is because he was hit by Karen Read's car. So it's just one thing that makes that story more powerful, and you're slowly building this evidence.
This temperature evidence was not introduced last time, so this is new for this trial. And I do think it's an incredibly powerful one because we've said, the more we always have circumstantial versus direct evidence, all of these circumstantial...
Bottom line is Arca is going to get to testify. Essentially what happened is the judge concluded that the defense attorneys had once again intentionally violated the discovery rules, but... she didn't say my hands are tied, but she essentially said my hands are tied. So they violated those rules, but she's not going to get rid of Arca. Essentially what she said is Brennan would be able to cross-examine them as however he wants. I don't think many objections are going to be sustained on that. Now, why is that? It's pretty simple. So Karen Read, she's putting on her case. This is her expert who's going to say she didn't do it, right? she doesn't have time to replace them. If she did replace them, they would have to do a report, and the state would get a certain amount of time to review that report. All the problems, frankly, with some of the stuff ARCA has done would just be recreated with a new firm. So, as unfortunate as it is for the judge, you're like, you intentionally violated discovery rules, but I can't get rid of this expert, because if you did that, either Karen Reed's, she has a really good appeal now because she doesn't have this expert, or it's an ineffective assistance of counsel type claim because her counsel so egregiously violated the rules that her right to have effective representation was violated. So the judge is in a really difficult place where if she takes action to remedy these problems, it's going to end up ruining the trial. So I don't know what's going to happen to the lawyers after this with the bar and everything else. But as far as the trial goes, we're moving forward with ARCA.
I was going to say, yes, I think practically that is correct for purposes of just this Karen Reed trial. She couldn't really kick out this ARCA expert. But with that said, one of the worst things you can do as an attorney, as a professional in a courtroom, is to violate the court's orders, violate the rules, whatever rules they are, evidentiary rules, discovery rules. And this was willful. This was not an accident. This was not a gotcha sort of thing. This was incredibly troublesome as a professional that goes beyond this case. I would have liked to see the judge have a little bit more, even though she cannot kick out this expert. I would have liked something like, I don't know, a fine for the attorneys having to stay up all night and file a report documenting every single malfeasance that occurred here. And so it's like documented on the public docket so that, I don't know, any bar association can go and look at what the attorneys have done. Something that has teeth to stop them and to truly reprimand, because this is up to the judge to run their courtroom how they see fit. And having attorneys violate their duties to the court so blatantly is an affront to the court and to the justice system. So while for this specific purpose, yeah, the expert probably had to stay so that we didn't have an appeal issue, but these attorneys are going to have to answer, or they should have something much bigger to answer to after this trial with respect to their professional responsibilities.
Judge Cannon's kind of like a bad parent. Like, she just lets the kids run wild, and then she gives them a few stern words, and then they just go back to doing what they're doing. And that's what she's done. And it's hard to imagine, we talk about the other trials, the Murdaugh trial or the Delphi trial. It's hard to imagine the judges in those cases allowing something like this, but here we are.
And I'll say this. I have never done something like what the defense have done here with this expert. But if I knew this is what we had done and it was about to come out and like all the bad acts were about to come out, I would probably on my own volition withdraw this expert and try some late game, file a motion for an emergency, like new expert to get it in front of the issue and not ever let this go to voir dire, because when it went to voir dire, all the bad acts came out. Now the judge may have denied that, but I would have been like, oh my gosh. And instead they continued the lie. I mean, it was just bold-faced. It was bold-faced. And you know why? Because you know exactly who your judge is. What are they going to do? Nothing. We're good. That was the attitude they had.
I was a little surprised by ARCA because they have a business.
This is their profession, right?
As far as I'm concerned, they're a defense firm now. Like, they've been a firm that's worked for government and for defense people. But if you're a prosecutor's office, how do you ever hire ARCA when you hear them? Like, I mean, I don't want to dwell on this, but literally, at one point, they had like 100 text messages between them and the defense counsel. And as we talked about before, the conversations you have with your expert about what they're going to testify to are discoverable, because that's the other side gets to hear sort of what all's going on. Like things like meet here at 11. Okay, that's not necessarily discoverable, right? That's fine. But they have all these text messages that are never turned over. And then the expert deletes them after the trial. And he's like, well, it's not like I keep text messages forever. And he's like, the trial was over. The trial ended in a mistrial. Like, you knew you were going to testify again. And then he's like, and then they switched to Signal. And he's like, yeah, so then we switched Signal. What do we know about Signal? It deletes things automatically. And it's encrypted. And he's like, oh, I didn't know Signal was encrypted. It's like, yes, you did. You're an engineer.
That's why you did it. That's why you did it.
He even said at one point that they switched the signal because the Commonwealth was like looking for this kind of information. It's like, dude, what in the world? But anyway, they're going to testify. And let me just say this. They are not an independent expert. Like, we heard that a lot the first time. They are 100% in the bag for Karen Read, and that's who they are, and that's fine. That's usually how defense experts are. They're in the bag for the people they're working for. That's why they're defense experts. But I don't want to hear anybody say the independent ARCA, et cetera, because they're not. They're clearly not. So after this, Jen McCabe testifies. And, this was a big moment in the first trial because she's supposedly the mastermind of this whole conspiracy. She conspired to murder her friend along with all these other people and cover it up and frame Karen Read. She talks about that night and drinking. She talks about how Karen wanted to go get pizza. They decided not to do that. Instead, they decided to go say hello to Brian Jr. at this birthday party. She gives them directions. At one point, she mentions Bella's mom, which was someone that John had once dated. I will always believe that this was the trigger, that's what triggered Karen Read. She was already upset, as we heard from a lot of text messages throughout the day about this sort of constant rolling fight they were involved in. At some point, she notices the SUV is out front. She's texting John several different times. Are you here? Are you coming in? All this other stuff. John never comes in. The next morning, she wakes up to a call from John's daughter, who is extremely upset. We're going to learn, the daughter's going to testify, the reason she's extremely upset is because Karen has told her that she thinks John is dead and he's been hit by a snowplow. That's what she's going to say. So she calls Jen, and Jen can hear Karen screaming in the background. This call is at 4:53 a.m. At this point, Jen calls Chris Albert, but she gets no answer. And Karen says to her that she can't even remember leaving the bar. At one point, she's going to say that she left John at the bar. Turns out that is her first lie about where John was, and that has to fall away once she finds out that, in fact, no, Jen saw her SUV outside. So at this point, she goes over to Karen's house. She notices the taillight is broken. Carrie Roberts shows up. They don't really know each other that well, but Carrie has also been called by Karen, and they drive to John's house. This is the infamous moment where Jen and Carrie, knowing how John feels about shoes in the house, take their shoes off, but Karen does not. They then get into Carrie's car and drive to 34 Fairview. Karen, in the midst of this nor'easter, this blizzard, sees John on the side of the road immediately. Jen calls 911. Karen is screaming in the background. She's hysterical. And at some point during this, we actually see the photo from the police cruiser that morning, which shows Karen's taillight heavily damaged. Karen will tell a medic in the hearing range of Jen that she hit John. We're going to hear from that medic later on. Jen is told by the police to go wake up the owners of the home. She goes inside and she wakes up her sister and brother-in-law. They go downstairs. Officer Lank, who I believe is the one who told her to go inside, is already in the house. Front door is unlocked. He's sort of standing there in the entryway. And they talk for a little while, sort of go through what happened. At some point, Jen eventually will turn over her phone to the police so that they can look through it for some of the information that we've already mentioned. At some other point, John's mom will ask her and Carrie Roberts to make a timeline of what happened that day so that they can remember it in the future and to sort of jog their memory about everything that happened. This is something that the defense has talked about a lot because the defense paints it as this is when they made up the story, right? So Carrie Roberts, who doesn't know Jen and is John's friend since high school, supposedly conspired with Jen to help cover up the fact that Jen and all her friends murdered John. Doesn't really make any sense, but nevertheless, that's what they're going to say. Cross-examination of Jen lasts forever, just like it did last time. But this time is very different. Number one, Jen, the first time she let Jackson have it. And I kind of liked that because, frankly, she'd been through hell for 2 years. Kind of liked her giving it to him. But, of course, there were a lot of people who were upset about that. Like, why is she so defensive? All this other stuff. Well, so this time,
her
she was
life was being
calm.
ruined by the defense, guys. Remember that.
Yeah.
I mean, truly, her life was getting ruined. So you understood why so much it came out.
She's so calm that Jackson is asking her questions about why she's so calm and trying. He does this a lot. He keeps trying to bring up the last trial. He keeps trying to bring up the FBI investigation, even though he knows both things are things he can't discuss. And so he's like asking her all these questions about the last, how active she was last trial, and who told her to be calm this trial and all this other stuff. And it all just kind of falls flat, in my opinion. A lot of the cross is about subtle differences between her testimony in grand jury and her testimony at trial. In grand jury, she says a lot of the did I hit him? Could I have hit him? Maybe I hit him from Karen Read. Whereas in trial, she's more specific. And she basically says, well, she said all those things because she was kind of hysterical. Jackson tries to push back on her being hysterical, which completely blows up in his face because later on, there's going to be a ton of evidence that she's hysterical, including the fact that her own father had her taken for sort of mental evaluation. But nevertheless, so this goes on for a while. They talk about the federal investigation, though they can't talk about it being a federal investigation. Jackson keeps talking about agents, which keeps drawing objections. They talk about how at one point, at 10 minutes after they left her home, she called them to say that she had spoken to other people about the case because she had forgotten to mention those people. She's talking to her husband. She remembered, oh, shoot, I talked to those people. She calls them. This is painted as like, much like the Kerry Roberts thing, is like, see, she was caught in a lie. And I just go ahead and tell you, as a prosecutor, if someone calls the FBI 10 minutes after the meeting and says, oh, by the way, I remember these two other things, we say, thank you. And we add that to the report. We don't say, we should prosecute her for lying to a federal agent. And, you know, it's just the reaching, it just feels, like I said, the first trial, it felt wrong and it felt ineffective given the evidence, but you could understand what the defense was doing. This time, everything feels more like
contrived.
A reach. Yeah, it feels contrived. And part of it's just because of where everything's falling.
I mean, it truly feels like that this is what keeps coming up every time I see something that the defense does that I'm like, question mark, is they have their playbook and it's like they do not know how to deviate from it. Because look, we've said this before. For whatever reason, it worked last time. There was a mistrial. And so they're like, well, we're going to go by the exact same playbook. Doesn't matter that the players are all different, that the field is different. We're not even playing the same game anymore. They're like, doesn't matter. Execute the playbook. And that isn't falling flat here. And because it worked once, it certainly isn't working. Oh, I hope it is not working a second time.
Okay. So at this point, and I mean, this is like after a day and a half, Jen finally gets off stage. Hopefully she'll never have to testify again. And we play some videos. So the first one is about Bella's mom. I think the prosecution feels the same way we do, that this was the triggering event. So this is Karen talking about that.
There was a woman who was a mother to kids that were close to John's kids, who lived very close to the Alberts. In fact, when Jen was navigating John to the Alberts when I was driving, she said, it's near Ashley's house. Ashley and John had hooked up prior to John and I dating.
So it's interesting that this is still in her mind, that Ashley's house was mentioned and that John had hooked up with Ashley prior to them dating, to the point that she's talking about it in this interview. So then they play a few more videos.
Either he's hurt himself and is incapacitated. He could be passed out on someone's couch, which is just weird. We're not on a campus. Everyone lives in their own home with children, or he's sleeping with someone. And there were multiple women in the neighborhood of Fairview that John had been with. And one of them very recently, before I started dating John.
Clip 16, please.
We'll backtrack later. Let's start with 3-4. So, who are you with? I'm with Jen McCabe and Kerry Roberts, and Kerry Roberts is Ford Explorer. And I'm in the back, leaning over the front two seats. Kerry's driving and Jen's in the passenger seat. And I describe this to everyone, so you've probably heard this before, but John looked like a buffalo on the prairie. It was just a lawn and a heat that wasn't a bush or a hydrant or a dog. It was a weird shaped lump at that time in those elements. And I was looking to find him on the side of the road. I was expecting I'd find him. And the fear of what I was going to see is the worst feeling I've ever experienced. The anticipation of what is awaiting me was as extreme a feeling. I wouldn't say it was as extreme a feeling as the grief of realizing what happened to him.
And finally, clip 17, please.
Your Honor, we need to see the court before this was played.
All right, hold that, please.
I mean, why? Why? Those are her own words, that she was expecting to see him on the side of the road, when one lie she said was that she left him at the bar, and the second lie was that he went in the house and she left. So if he's in a bar or in a house, why would you expect to find him on the side of the road looking like a buffalo in the field, when you can see with your own eyes it did not look like a buffalo in the field? You saw nothing but white.
And I just got to tell you guys, sometimes I don't know what's going on in the world that we're doing this, or that anyone's interested in this. The woman is telling you about, I mean, this is the first time she's been truthful about the anticipation. She knows they're about to pull up and find him on the side of the road. She knows that because that's where she left him the night before. Now, look, you may say, well, yeah, but she didn't know she was going to kill him. She hit him, and that's fine. We can debate that until the end of time, right? I mean, that's a different question about, is it manslaughter or is it murder too? But she hit him and she left him there. Maybe she thought he was going to get up and go inside. And now she realizes, oh my God, no, I killed him. But she knows they're going to get there, and there he's going to be. And the anticipation of that moment. And anyone who's ever lost a loved one knows this. Like, if you've ever had that situation where you get the phone call that someone's in the hospital and they're probably not going to make it, and you're driving and you're in that sort of that liminal space between your life before and your life once you get there, and you have to deal with the fact that this terrible, tragic thing has happened. A lot of us have been in that situation. Well, that's where she was. She was driving over to Fairview where she was going to find John's body. That's what she just said. And I don't know, given her own statements and everything else we've talked about, why this is even complicated or controversial. So then, after the playing of these clips, we move on to Heather Knowles. This is quick. She's the doctor who's going to testify about blood alcohol. At this point, Karen's pretty much confirmed that she was drunk, but at 9 a.m. that morning, her blood alcohol was between 0.078 and 0.92, and she estimates that would be between about 0.14 and 0.28 the night before. It's consistent, entirely consistent with the amount she had drank. I think we can all be certain that that night she was over the legal limit. Whatever else you want to say about this case, I think that's been definitively proven. And you can tell it's been proven because I'm pretty sure they let Yannetti do the cross. And Yannetti has essentially been relegated. It's like him and Lally are hanging out, smoking cigarettes and drinking bourbon because they're not really doing anything in this trial. And he gets to cross that witness. After that...
I'm sorry. I
mean,
bet
it's true, right?
I bet he's kind of like, thank goodness, because it's not going great for us, guys.
Yeah. I mean, he really is just kind of hanging out. And I thought he was fine. I thought he was just as good as Jackson last time, but apparently Jackson doesn't feel that way.
I like this next witness because I really liked him in the first trial, in the sense that this witness to fit into the conspiracy theory is so outrageous. And that's Ryan Nagel, who is not really attached to anyone in the house except that he drove to go pick up Julie Nagel from the murder party that's happening inside. It might be a murder party, might be a dog homicide party. We don't know, something like that. There's a lot going on inside this house, but he comes to just pick up Julie from the party, make sure she has a ride home from this murderous party. And he arrives around 12:30. He testified, just like last time, that he followed Karen's vehicle to the house, and he saw that her car ended up near the flagpole and then left a few minutes later. Now, he said that he saw inside a woman was in the car who, with hands on the wheel, and the dome light was on. And importantly, Ryan says that he never saw John.
I love Ryan because of how much he just hates being there. He hated being there last time. He hates being there this time. Just doesn't even want to do it. One thing I loved about this, it's so interesting to follow the people who are in Karen Read's camp and to see their sort of logic. So Ryan says that he got there around 12:30 and left like 5 minutes later. And so they're like, see, he left at 12:35, and that would have been after the prosecution said that John had already been hit. So how the whole case falls apart. And it's like, yeah, he's estimating times. He doesn't know exactly when he got there. He doesn't know exactly when he left. He's giving you an estimation. He was there. Probably what's happening is as he's leaving, John has gotten out. He's gotten out of the car as he's leaving. That's why the dome light's on, because he'd opened the door and
They're
30
probably in the middle
seconds
of
after he
fighting.
drives by. Yeah.
Right?
30 seconds after he drives by, she's going to hit him. That's what
Like,
actually.
if only he stayed, right? This is why the dome light is so interesting, especially because her hands are on the wheel. You can imagine that what might be happening is, I've done this before where I'm still in the middle of a conversation, especially if you're in a fight about Bella's mom, where you open the door so it like cocks it. And so the light comes on to, light brighten the view. Before you step out, you're still there talking. And if her hands are on the steering wheel, like as in like, just get the F out, John, or whatever, it's still in the heat of discussion still, is all within seconds. And of course, he's not there alone. Heather Maxson is his girlfriend at the time, and she's there. She gives the exact same testimony as Ryan. She's not connected to anyone in the house. She's just along for the ride to pick up Julie. The only thing that's different between Heather and Ryan's testimony is that she doesn't notice the dome light, which actually points to credibility to me, because if they were trying to be in cahoots about their testimony, you would think that every single detail, something as insignificant as a dome light, would also be part of it, because they actually know a very small slice of what happened that night. A couple minutes, a car, flagpole, dome light. 3 things. Why wouldn't their stories perfectly match if what they were doing was creating a cover for the conspiracy?
Sarah Levinson was also there that night with Julie Nagel. Julie actually doesn't leave with the brother, by the way. She tells him. She sends him on because Jen McCabe, thinking, well, we're about to kill somebody, so what we need is more witnesses, tells her, don't worry, you can stay. I'll take you home afterwards. We'll drive you home afterwards. So she ends up staying. Sarah Levinson, completely unrelated person. She's at the party, doesn't see John come in, doesn't see him get murdered. In fact, she says it was a normal party. There was no fighting. Everybody was happy. They're playing It's Raining Men. Everything's great. She left between 1:30 and 2 with Jen McCabe, and Jim McCabe's offering, to make her a peanut butter and jelly sandwich because they had left a loaf of bread in the back seat. So a little joke there. Jen's like, I just killed my best friend. You want a peanut butter and jelly sandwich? So she says that, and then we move on from her. After this, we have Paul Gallagher. Gallagher is the police officer who was one of the first people there and does some of the initial collections. He famously is the one who comes up with using the leaf blower, which will later be praised by the independent audit of this investigation as being rather innovative, and it was. And if you actually watch the video of them doing it, it is fascinating how well it worked. Apparently this is something they do in Alaska as well. They recovered some blood.
These people know snow.
Yes. They recovered some blood in Solo cups and put them in paper grocery bags. This was attacked by Jackson, and honestly, I thought this was his best attack, because even though they're the same kind of paper bags, they're grocery bags. Possibility of contamination is high. You shouldn't do that. You should use the sterile bags that you have. But they didn't have any of those because they're responding in a blizzard, and all of that stuff was with SRT, CERT, and apparently they had some, but only like certain officers could access it. So basically they're doing the best they can with what they have. And frankly, as I've always said, if it was contaminated, that would be good for Karen, because there'd be, unknown DNA in there. Maybe this is the real killer, right? But nevertheless. So he notes there were no footprints in the snow. He talked to Jen McCabe with Officer Lank, who we mentioned before. He didn't see any drag marks. He didn't see any dog prints. He said there was no evidence of anything in the house, and he explained the lack of probable cause for the search. Quote, no one could put John in the house, including Miss Reed. And we talked about this a lot. She initially said she didn't see John go in the house. She's the one who dropped him off. I heard somebody say, or maybe they tweeted it, they should have searched the house just to be safe. And it's like, what is wrong with you people? Like, do you
constitutional
like
protections,
your constitutional
y'all?
rights? Because I can search. If we're searching houses just to be safe, there's a lot of houses I'd like to search. Because there's a lot of y'all out there that I got some questions about, right? If that's what we can do, if we're now at the just to be safe stage, that's what your privacy rights mean. I will never understand. I get it from like the hardcore Karen Reed people who are trying to just throw something at the wall. I will never understand the number of like defense attorneys who I've seen their filings They're motions to suppress.
They are
they want to suppress.
Greatest. Haven't we heard it from some defense attorneys who are all over the internet? I am the only thing that stands between, the constitutional protected rights and the big government. That's what they always say, because guess what? You're going to file suppression motions for, guess what? Illegal searches. Yeah. That's like the number one thing you do as a defense attorney.
Yeah, it's amazing. And we've been through this. Like, there's no decent prosecutor would write that motion, and no decent judge would grant it, and no decent officer would ask for it. That's how I feel about it. And Lank was in the house. He didn't search the house, but he was in there. And as they've testified before, there was no evidence even in the house that, there was nothing askew. There were no signs of a fight, et cetera, et cetera. It's just crazy to think they could have gotten a search warrant. So the cross is long, as we said, focuses a lot on evidence collection, not securing the scene, not putting up a tent, not putting up tape. And as Gallagher keeps saying, it was the middle of a nor'easter. It just wouldn't have worked. Like, we couldn't have done that. There's probably a good argument, I think, that someone should have stayed at the scene the whole time. We see this a lot, where officers will sort of pack up and leave the scene and come back. And I think that happened some in the Murdaugh case. Obviously, it happened in the Ramsey case. It happens here. They're in a difficult situation because of the blizzard, I get. But to the extent the scene was ever left, not a great look, though Surt's going to testify that there was no evidence that anybody had been on the scene. Anyway, we're going to see that in a minute. We then have a meteorologist who testifies and testified it was the biggest.
Think this was new, right?
This was new.
I kind of liked it. I like the independentness because of the whole, emphasis on, we have all these troopers who show up on the site who say they remember that it was very windy and very snowy. I actually liked the meteorologist because it was all of us probably have touch points with meteorologists on TV when there's severe weather. So I thought this was effective.
And I just Christina's asking, what about the fact there's a body out front? If there's a body in front of your yard, would they ask to search your house? I have had 2 dead bodies in front of my house.
What? Okay. I want to search your house.
I didn't tell the story
okay?
last time.
I want to search your house now.
When I was growing up, when I was in high school, actually, and these 2 guys were driving down the road, lost control of their car, went into the ditch, hit the embankment, and were ejected from their car, ended up dead on my driveway. 2 guys, right? Police show up and they say, this is obviously a car wreck. They collect the bodies. They go away. No one asked to search our house, nor would they, because there was no reason to think those people were ever in the house. There was every reason to think it was an accident that happened on the road. Same thing here. There's no reason to think anything happened in that house. There's every reason to think that whatever happened on the side of the road. So no, the fact that someone ended up dead in front of your house is not enough to search your house or the neighbor's house, because remember, this is right on the property line, or the person across the street, or anybody else. That is not enough to violate the sanctity of your home and search your house.
Okay, period. Now that we're telling secrets, so I also had a dead body in front of my house one time.
See, and you were trying to get me in trouble.
I was, but I didn't have 2. Okay, so it wasn't my house. I was renting, and this is a corollary to when you can search. So I lived in New York City one summer in a very rough part of town because I had no money, and I was interning for free in New York City. So I lived out in Bushwick when it was not cool like it is now. And quite literally, as all New York housing is, it was not a standalone house. It was a building that had been converted to, 10 apartments or something. And I lived in a shoebox. Actually, I lived in the kitchen of a shoebox. Someone else got the bedroom, but I lived in the kitchen underneath the dining room table. And we were the second floor. One of the nights I get home from my internship, there is yellow tape and there's a dead body who's been shot. So it was looking like a homicide. This was not a car accident. Something had happened here. And he was right there. And I remember thinking, all I could think of was, I have to get to my apartment. Like, how am I going to get there? And the police was like, you can step through. Pull the yellow tape across, and I just kind of shuffled around. And went upstairs.
Scene.
This is not a good scene control. Also, it was a very violent community, and if everyone had to stay on the other side of the yellow tape, no one could go home, truthfully. But they could not search my apartment because there was no ties to that man being murdered in my apartment. But you know who they could search? Where the guy had just bought some drugs in the apartment right below me. And they did search it, and they did arrest someone that day. So, probable cause to get into that apartment, not my apartment, even though that was the threshold of my door.
And the thing is, as the day goes on, the probable cause just continues to go down. They're going to talk to Karen Reed very soon, and she's going to say, Jen's already said he didn't go in the house. Karen's going to say he didn't go in the house. Karen, by the way, is telling people she hit him. Then they're going to notice that Karen Reed's tail light is broken. Then they're going to find a lot of tail light pieces in the yard. So, probable cause is at its highest when they find the body, and all they have is a body in the front yard. And it just, by the time they typed up the affidavit, even if they wanted to do the search, they'd be calling them and saying, never mind. We got a lady saying she did it, and we got her broken tail light and tail light pieces and everything else. So they were never going to get in that house, ever. It's a false argument. And anyone who believes in the Constitution I should be the one trying to get in that house, not the people who are supposed to be the protectors of your constitutional rights. The reality is, the protectors of constitutional rights are the prosecutors and the cops. The defense attorneys will do whatever it takes to win their case. And if that means violating your rights, as in this case, that's what they'll do. And hopefully this has demonstrated that to everyone. So back to our friendly meteorologist.
Sorry. I do love the meteorologist. Please tell.
He's great. He testified it was the biggest snowstorm in Boston history for the month of January, which is crazy because I was there in January for some really big blizzards, so this surprised me, but that's how much it snowed. And the ground was frozen solid. This is important because the theory of the prosecution is John gets sideswiped, he falls down, he hits his head on the hard frozen ground, it causes a fatal injury, and more proof of that is going to be the fact that both of his eyes are black. He has raccoon eyes, which is a very common thing you see from a shattered skull. We're talking about this in the West Memphis 3 case. As a matter of fact, one of the children had the same injury. So after he testifies, we have Trooper Nick Guarino, who has testified earlier, and he's now back. He testifies that Karen's phone connected to John's Wi-Fi at 12:36 and 39 seconds, which if you take the time where the prosecution thinks they hit her and the time when it connected, she only would have had to have driven about 35 miles an hour to make the drive in exactly that much time. And that would have put her about 300 feet outside the property at the time. We then go through Karen's calls and all her crazy voicemails. And there are 53 calls between 12:33 a.m. and 6 a.m. There's a PowerPoint that shows these calls and what time they happened. The messages are really bad for Karen because we have a family show here. We won't play them for you, but they include mere minutes after John has probably been struck and killed by her calling and dropping F-bombs and telling him how much she hates him. She is very clearly in a rage.
This trial truly is, Karen Reed is a character in this trial through the videos and her own voicemails. It is her voice telling the story. And that's what's been so effective this time, the timing of how they do everything. But also they had a treasure trove to work with because these are Karen's voluntary, recordings, both to national media and to voicemail messages to the man that she has just killed. It is actually shocking. And I think it really goes one day, it's not going to be now, I'd really like to understand why this case reached the fever pitch of conspiracy that it ever did. And I think it has a lot to do with the person who's at the center of it, who allows this to happen. The person whose own words I think is going to convict her. Now, with that, so it doesn't stop there. Now the prosecution, they told you this in their opening, the arc of what the storytelling was going to be. It's just hard-hitting evidence after hard-hitting evidence. So next is Lieutenant Kevin O'Hara, who's a CERT leader. So at 4:56 p.m., CERT arrives on the scene. Now, Officer Tully arrives just 5 minutes later, and they do a search shoulder to shoulder in unison to try and make sure they get everything they can. Snow was fresh. It was untouched, he testifies. They use headlamps and shovels, rakes, brooms, all these things to try and sift through the snow that is continuing to fall down in, remember what the meteorologist said, the largest snowstorm in January. The snowbanks are 4 to 5 feet tall with snow about 15 to 20 inches. No one else entered the marked grid. Now, they did find John's missing shoe and shards of broken taillight on the ground. And given the conditions and the darkness at this time, they called off the search at this point. Another officer testifies about bagging the evidence. Now, note when the shards of taillight were found that same day. It wasn't days later. Someone didn't come later and sprinkle it all over the ground. This was the shoulder to shoulder. No one else was here. They could tell because this is a snowstorm. The snow was untouched. They were the only ones there, and they found the shards of taillight that evening.
Oh, the conspiracy theory is that Michael Proctor, evil Michael Proctor, and shadowy troopers got to Karen Reed's taillight, noticed that it was cracked because she had tapped John's truck the night before, shattered the taillight, gathered the pieces, took them to this place, planted them on the ground for the CERT team to find. The theory is not that CERT is involved in this, by the way. They're the only group of people not in the conspiracy. That is the theory. How in the world do you plant taillight pieces under 2 feet of snow? 15 to 20 inches of snow that they're going through. How do you do that? How do you do that and not leave any tracks, any marks, any sign? Explain that. How do you recreate pristine snow? Even if, for instance, if someone had walked through that snow earlier and then it had snowed some more, guess what? You would still be able to tell. The footprints wouldn't be all the way down, but you would still be able to see the depressions. There would still be evidence of that. How in the world did they manage to do that? They found these pieces that day. They didn't find them all. People will point that out. Why didn't they find them all? Because there were 15 to 20 inches of snow, and it's 4:56 at night in January, or whenever this is, in the winter in Boston. Like, you're not going to find everything. And in fact, they came back several times over the next few weeks as the snow was melting, and they're finding additional stuff that they didn't find before. Really, what happened was they found the stuff and they're like, we got it. Okay, it's dark, it's snowing. You guys get out of here. We'll come back and get the rest of it later. We got what we need. And that's what they're thinking. Like, we've proven this now. Lady with the broken taillight pieces, dude looks like, he's got damaged the back of his head from it slamming into the ground. We know what happened, right? And that should have been enough.
You don't need all the taillight pieces to convict, right? I mean, in fact, what it shows is the force in which the taillight broke. Because if it was a small tap, maybe a crack, maybe one big piece falls out. Think of, this happened to me the other day. I dropped a glass in my kitchen. What happened? It shattered because of the force in which it fell. I vacuumed, I mopped, and I mopped again by hand because I didn't want glass shards on the ground. I have lots of little kids running around. Guess what I found for the next week? Shards of glass all over my kitchen floor because of the force in which it shattered. And it went into so many pieces that despite my best efforts in broad daylight and lots of light and all of the tools you would need to clean up, I continue to find shards. So if anything, I would say this shows at which speed the taillight or the car slammed into John.
So then we have Jessica Hyde who testifies. And I love Jessica Hyde. I think she's amazing. The Free Karen Reed people try to describe her testimony as boring because that's the best they can do. She knows exactly what she's talking about. Great witness, talks about the 2:27 a.m. search that happened at 6:30, can explain it so well. I mean, my favorite part is on cross. I mean, Alessi's doing the best he can, bless him, but she just knows it so well. And, what you hope when you're an attorney crossing an expert is that your expert is good enough to give you the information you need. And the funniest part of her testimony was at the very beginning, she talked about how you would make this mistake and how her entry level students in her base level course will make these mistakes. And one of the things she does is teach them how to differentiate between this artifact and what's reality. And it's hilarious because the defense expert basically made the same mistake as the entry-level students in her courses would make. That's the whole reason. The only reason we have this 2:27 a.m. thing is because there's one guy who presumably will testify later who thinks this is when this search happened. He's the only person they can find to testify to it. If you didn't hear his testimony in the first trial, listen to it this trial. I assume he'll testify. I'm not sure. But she wipes all this away. She confirms that none of this stuff was deleted, and there's no way to manually delete the search. Great. She's a great witness. Now, she's primarily debunking the conspiracy, which is something you have to do. It's not like she's adding a lot to the Karen Reed is guilty side of things, but I don't really know how you could listen to her and Ian and come away thinking this 2:27 thing is anything but completely debunked. In my mind, it's completely debunked. I don't even know why we're still talking about it, but she was cross-examined extensively, and that took up a big chunk of time. And that brings us to Yuri Buchanek, who's been testifying, it seems like, for forever. He's testifying yesterday. He testified all day today. He's going to testify on Monday. And the reason for that is because he was the trooper along with Proctor who did this investigation. And it seems like, and Karen Reed has said, I don't know how she knows this, but she said that Proctor's not going to testify this time. I don't know about that. I feel like that's a risk. I get why you wouldn't put him up there, but this is a gamble by the prosecution. If they don't put Proctor up, it is a gamble. It's either going to be brilliant or it's going to blow up in their face. And that will depend entirely on what happens. If she's convicted,
I was going to say, and they may
brilliant.
be trying to figure out along the way, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and this is a tough call. And this is the kind of tough call you have to make because you don't really need him. Like you have Buchanan. He can testify to everything. The defense on cross, they're trying to point out how important Proctor was for obvious reasons. And they could call him if they wanted to, though. Then they got to direct him, maybe try and get him declared hostile, but just a more difficult situation if you're calling him. But they're trying to point out like, oh, he signed the search warrants and all this stuff, which I always think is funny because we often have the agents sign the search warrants who are not the important agents for the whole reason that we don't want the agent who has to testify to have to defend whatever he wrote in like a probable cause affidavit early on in the investigation. So, we often have non-important agents sign that. Non-important agents testify in grand jury to avoid what you've seen. So the defense can't say, well, didn't you say in grand jury X, Y, and Z? Didn't you say in your affidavit X, Y, and Z? But I think in this case, it is true that Proctor and Buchanan is his supervisor. And Buchanan talks about how he actually got in trouble because we went through the whole Proctor thing, that he didn't supervise Proctor sufficiently in the whole text messages. We read some of the text messages. He lost 4 days of vacation, was sort of his punishment for that whole thing. Proctor obviously eventually gets fired. Anyway, that's all an aside. He works the case, goes to the hospital, recovers the clothes, goes to Karen's house in Dighton. She actually went to her parents' house after this was all over, so they have to go out there. She admitted to drinking some vodka tonics while she was there. She said she didn't see John go into the house. She said she didn't know why her taillight was broken. At this point, they seize her phone and her SUV. It gets towed back to the Canton police station at 4:16 p.m. He and Proctor sort of go with it. They get to the station. They leave the garage where it's being stored at 5:51, which, note the time, that's an hour after the CERT teams already arrived and started searching in Fairview, finding pieces of taillights. So somehow, this mystical, magical thing where they're teleporting taillight pieces over there is happening while they're still at Canton PD. And they actually don't even leave there. They go to a conference room and they're briefed on the evidence that is being recovered by the CERT team. So they're hearing from the CERT team, hey, we're finding taillight pieces. We're finding his shoe.
How can they possibly be briefed about what they planted, though? Which they did it in time, which under 2 feet of snow. This is a very complex conspiracy, Brett.
I am sure that, probably Buchanan is just, if I know this happened, there is no CERT team. They were just there the whole time. Everybody's in on it. I mean, basically, and you see this, and we talked about this a little bit, and we made fun of the conspiracy, but the more I hear this, the more I get it. Like the conspiracy has to be massive. It has to involve all of these people,
and
right?
Not just people, the weather, by the way. You had to time it for the biggest nor'easter in January in Boston ever as well to help cover up these things.
And by the way, I think we skipped Katie McLaughlin. She testified too. Katie McLaughlin, who's the random firefighter who went to a birthday party or a shower or something, one of the Alberts, and has had her life just completely destroyed by the lunatics who support Karen Reed. She testifies, she's the one she's the first responder who heard Karen say, I hit him. And she's just another example. Like you have all these people who have to be in on this, right? And it's wild that they still did. AJ still did the whole, aren't you in a picture with Albert? Y'all have known each other since grade school. When you got Karen Reed on video saying that she said she hit him. And yet you're still going after this poor girl who's just a firefighter. That's all she is. A firefighter who was scheduled to work that day before the day even happened. So somehow, how fortunate, once again, the coincidences that she, lifelong friend of the daughter of the murderer, she drank a beer with her once. Surely she would frame an innocent woman for murder to protect her friend's father. Who wouldn't? I mean, they went to high school together, for goodness sake. You see this, like it has to be this. It has to be this big conspiracy because it all falls apart if everybody's not involved in it. And this is another example. If the CERT team's not in on it, if Buhenig's not in on it, if it's just Proctor, it doesn't work. They all have to be in on it. You know, it has to be, every police officer has to be in on it. It has to be this massive conspiracy for it to work at all.
And yet they continue to do a very thorough investigation, right? Because Buchanan continued to say, well, we didn't stop investigating there because on February 3rd, they conduct another search at Fairview. And here is the part that you normally hear. You may think from the defense that this is the first time they find red and clear taillight plastic, but no, they find more because, duh, remember there was a nor'easter. It was literally still snowing. It was dark at night because it was January. And so when they go back, they do find more taillight pieces. They also find John's hat. They find a cocktail straw. Remember, by the way, week 1 when they played the video of Karen Reed in her interview to national television where she said, I didn't touch that drink. We left with our cocktail glasses from the Waterfall Bar. What do we have here? Cocktail glass shattered and cocktail straw. As the snow continued to melt, they went back periodically and continued to find more evidence. Because those of you who may not have lived with snow before, I didn't until I moved up north, it is a true character in this story. There's only so much you can do. Yes, you can bring out the leaf blower and the rakes and whatnot, but at some point, you just gotta wait for the snow to melt. And that's what they're doing here. And they keep going back. They don't just call it a day. They keep going back to do their investigation. Now, obviously, Buchanan is on the stand, and at some point, this is going to have to come out, and they get into Proctor's texts. And they do read some. If you remember them from the first trial, they are terrible. Not good. This is not how a law enforcement officer should talk about anybody. Really, no one should talk like this. But it's coming out on the stand, and they get into the fact that Proctor was penalized for not taking appropriate action, and so was he as Proctor's supervisor. He himself lost 5 days of vacation days. Now, this is new information this time, too, because this happened since the last time he testified.
Yeah, and I don't know what's going to happen with Proctor. I don't know what effect it'll have. It's going to be interesting to see how that rolls out, and if the prosecution calls him out. I don't know. We're just going to see. I'm not sure what's going to happen. This continues. They keep going. They play the clip from 5:30 in the morning where Karen's like driving out. It's from the Ring camera, and you can see that her taillight's already shattered. And this is one of those, I don't get it, because you'll see people, it's like a 5-second long clip. And like 4 seconds into it, she takes her foot off the brake. And when she takes her foot off the brake and there's no longer the glow of the lights, you can clearly see where the taillight is already broken out. It is plain as day. But you'll see people take the clip from 3 seconds before where she's got her foot on the brakes and it's lit up and you can't see it as well. And it's like, do you just want to be misled? Because if you watch 2 seconds later, you can see there's a massive hole in her taillight. Just like, by the way, she admitted to. Like, it's just, there's just no question. There's just no question that her taillight's broken. And I don't know. I'm constantly sort of amazed by this, but they play it so you can see it. The cross-examination is extensive and ongoing. At one point, and look, it's very sort of, you can tell, like, Yuri Buchanan does not like Jackson. This is not uncommon. A lot of times, one of the things we always have to talk to police officers about is you have to be nice to the defense attorney. Buchanan is done with Alan Jackson. At one point, Jackson misspelled his name on purpose to make him mad. Turtle Boy's out there saying he should be deported, even though he's an American citizen who fought for his country after 9/11 and is a much better person than Turtle Boy ever will be. But that's the kind of stuff he's going through, and he's being snippy with Jackson, and that's just the way it is. And that has continued, and might be one of the reasons they are still in cross-examination. But one thing Jackson does, which I don't understand, is he has Buchanan read the text between Brian Higgins and Karen Reed. Now, you may remember this from the first trial. First trial, Brian Higgins testified, and the text messages come in, and basically it shows a sort of flirtatious relationship between Brian Higgins and Karen Reed. You may remember the whole weed whacker thing, right? I mean, that's part of this text message. Karen Reed kissed Brian Higgins at some point, I guess, and they're constantly sort of flirting and all this other stuff. Cringe to the max, particularly with Yuri Buchanan reading them. The funny thing is, I feel like Buchanan came off very aggressive against Jackson. Then he has him read these, and it totally humanizes him because he reads them. He doesn't just read them straight. He's like, doing inflection and sort of changing his voice as he's reading it. And it was bizarre. It was like surreal. We were through the looking glass.
I like beamed in and was watching it, and I was like, is this the direct? Because this is a weird decision by the direct. Oh, this is cross-examination? That was my response. Like, why would you do this?
Yeah, it was very strange.
It does not make their client look good.
Because like you, I was in and out today while it was going on. I had to sort of catch up tonight. But when I popped in, I got back in, and he's reading these text messages. And my first thought was, wow, we must be on redirect. Why is the prosecution, why are they having him do things
Exactly
weird,
what I thought.
right? And then it's like, oh, wait, it's Alan Jackson? That's insane. Like, this is just mind-blowing. And, I mean, I put it out there, like, why is this happening? I wanted to get some of the best argument from the people who support Karen Read. And the best that anybody could come up with was this somehow shows that Brian Higgins was so obsessed with Karen that he got in a fight with John over her. Because, there's 15 different theories about how this conspiracy went down and who it was, right? Right now we're on the Brian Higgins one. He gets in a fight with John. They have to cover it up. The problem is the text messages, he seems utterly uninterested in Karen. Like he is not pining over this woman. That is so
it's
clear.
the other way around.
Yeah. And so my thought was it was actually to show that Karen didn't really care enough about John to get mad enough to kill him. I don't know. I don't know what the theory is. Maybe they'll explain it in closing. Very strange.
Which is very strange, especially because we heard Karen's text messages previously from that day. And she's clearly very worked up about everything John's doing. Like you both can be the same. You can like somebody else and still want something to stay close. You don't want anyone else to have it.
And that's so true. Like just because, and y'all have been there are plenty of people who've been in a relationship and the other person's cheating, but you better not cheat. They don't mind cheating on you, but if you cheat on them, there's going to be hell to pay, right? It's the same type of thing. They also played the video from the bar, the Higgins and Brian Albert play fighting video, which has been presented as they're preparing for the big fight to come or something. I mean, just absurd, right? But they're doing all this through Buhinick, and I think this really encapsulates the problem for the defense in their case. The first trial, they got to present their theory as if they were the prosecution. They got to just march through it. Prosecution walked right into their hands. This time that's not happening, so they're having to shove all this stuff in through Buhinick and various other people, and it just falls flat, in my opinion. I do not see it being very successful. Okay, I think that gets us through this week. Buhinick will be back on the stand on Monday. I will say this, prosecution case seems like it's moving faster. The defense, they are cross-examining a lot, so they're slowing it down a lot, but I don't know how much longer we got. Prosecution's going to put on an accident reconstructionist. They're going to put on the niece and nephew of John, who he was taken care of after his sister died. And they're going to testify the things Karen Read said. I mean, if you think Carrie Roberts is lying about the 5 o'clock call when Karen called her and said John's dead, you're going to have to grapple with the fact that his then 16-year-old niece, Karen, came bursting into her room at 4:30 in the morning saying that John was dead and he'd been hit by a snowplow. So deal with that, because guess what? She's not in the conspiracy. I mean, Carrie Roberts isn't either, but the niece certainly isn't. And she's going to confirm that. So we're there. I do want to play one more video for you as we sign off. And this was a video that was played this week, and I think is really one of Karen Read's. I mean, there have been a lot of bad ones, but this one's particularly bad because it just shows this manufactured Jen McCabe thing, right? And particularly with all the evidence the jury has heard. And why has the prosecution focused so much on debunking this 227 call, particularly when they're not really focused on the conspiracy as much? Why have they done that? Well, here's Karen Read explaining.
I told her what Jen McCabe. Jen McCabe, it's me or her. Either I'm going down, Jen, or you are.
Woo,
there you
she
go.
said it herself. She laid bare the defense's whole motive. It's her, Jen McCabe.
And look, I don't understand y'all who find this woman to be a hero of some sort. She may be innocent, but she is a terrible person. I mean, and she just proves that again and again and again with really everything she does. This clip, the clip with John's mother, the way she acts towards him, just everything she does, she comes off terribly. And it's hard. And I've got to imagine it's difficult for the jury, right? I mean, the jury is trying to separate the fact that Karen Read comes off as a terrible person from the evidence, right? Because you don't want to convict her because she's a terrible person. But man, she is not likable. And it just surprises me that so many people have decided that she is their avatar. She is their hero for whatever it is, against corruption or against this or against that. Like, she's going to be their hero.
Like,
And
she's
I don't
hardly the
get it.
poster child you want to hang your entire cause on.
I
There
know.
may be some causes you care about, but I don't know why you've picked her as your poster child, because indeed she hasn't. And not to mention, not to lose sight of the fact that, like, John O'Keefe, who took in his niece and nephew, is horribly, tragically dead now because of her actions. And that's not bad enough. She has to go basically ruin everyone's life in Canton right now and drag this on and create this like national firestorm for sympathy for her with GoFundMe's and everything else, when, again, we've talked about this. There's limited airtime, there's limited money, there's limited resources. This is not the person you should be devoting all of your resources to. Please find a better cause, even if spend your money however you want, but she is not the one you should be supporting.
I find myself waxing dramatic in this case, and I keep thinking to the principle of like the banality of evil, right? You hear that talked about a lot with sort of various authoritarian regimes, the Holocaust, bad things that happen, the massacre, the Jonestown massacre, like all these things, right? The banality of evil, where, you know, evil isn't usually as dramatic as you think it's going to be. I mean, it often has dramatic things, like Hitler's obviously very dramatically evil, Stalin, Pol Pot, like whoever, Jim Jones. I mean, these people are all like these towering figures of darkness, but for them to do the terrible things they did, there had to be all these just normal people sort of just going along with them and helping them out, right? And that's the theory, that like there was somebody who drove the trains, and there was somebody who like packaged the cyanide, and there was somebody who passed out the Flavor Aid, you know, Jonestown. Like, there's just all these people. And with Karen Read, I just think about all these people who just sort of help her do these things. I mean, ruin lives, like slander teenagers and dogs and everybody else. Chloe came up. Bohennig's been talking about Chloe. I mean, it's all just there, right? And you just think, like, why? Why are you doing this? But anyway. Okay. Well, that's where we're at. Week 3 is done. I'm sure you have thoughts. But that's all we have to say about the first 3 weeks of Karen Read's trial, part 2.
And can I do note, though? 3 weeks, I know that this judge is not going full days, et cetera, et cetera. 3 weeks is still a very long time for a hit and run. She hit him. The amount of resources and the amount of energy and everything this sucks out of the room for real justice is horrendous. Truly horrendous. What a waste of the Commonwealth's time and money. This is a horrific hit and run where it ended in death. And it was because of Karen Read. But here we are, 3 weeks going on, 4 weeks going on longer, because the defense is probably going to go on much longer on their side. Is not common, should not happen, but it has because basically of the eyeballs on this case. So with that, we'll still be back to recap the rest of it. I don't think it's gonna finish next week, but I do hope once the jury is given the case for deliberation that we won't have to wait very long for justice to finally be done after 2 trials. So there we go. And I'm so sorry for being late, guys, but I'm back now.
She's back.
I'm back. All right. Anything else, Brett, before we sign off?
I got nothing.
All right.
I've said all I need to say.
I was going to say, let's sign off because we'll be right back with Karen Read part 85 million soon. Well, guys, thank you so much for following along with us. Remember, you can watch the live stream of the Karen Read trial every single day. We're not always there, but we pop in and out, and you guys can participate in the chat and talk to each other about it. Thank you for giving us your questions. If you disagree with anything we've said, please let us know at prosecutorspod@gmail.com. You can find us on all the social medias. But until next time, I'm Alice.
And I'm Brett.
And this is the Prosecutor's Legal Briefs. I haven't had childcare, and so my Brittany video bombed my video conference call yesterday. There's a reason you guys haven't been seeing me in the streams, because I'm fighting for my life. Brett was like, how you doing? I was like, I'm fighting for my life.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry, guys.
Yeah, I don't know if this is going to work or not.
Okay,
I'm just
how about
saying.
this? How about this? Stay. Don't
Just
stop
saying.
recording. Don't stop recording. I'm going to exit and come back
I
in.
won't.
Okay? Don't stop recording.
Why don't
I'll
you
be
do
right
that?
back.
I
I'm
won't
going
stop
to
recording.
exit to see if it can reset it.
Okay.
Be right back.
Pluto TV has all the shows and movies you love streaming for free. That means laughter is free with gut-busting comedies like The Neighborhood, Boomerang, and Ferris Bueller's Day Off.
Bueller.
Mystery is free with countless cases to crack from Criminal Minds, Tracker, and Matlock.
I'm a lawyer, like the old TV show.
And thrills are free with heart-pumping hits like The Walking Dead and Pulp Fiction.
Correct the mundo.
Feel the free Pluto TV. Stream now, pay never.